Hi, everyone. Welcome to DASER Online Experiments. My name is J.D. Tolosik, and I'm the Director of Cultural Programs of the National Academy of Sciences, and it is my pleasure to welcome you here today. So DASER, which stands for DC Art Science Evening Rendezvous, is a cross-disciplinary salon. We meet on a regular basis with the intent of bringing people from different communities into conversation. The goal of DASER is to encourage networking between disciplines and to foster a general spirit of collaboration and integrative thinking. So we ask questions like, how can different disciplines inform one another? Can this type of thinking lead to innovative ideas that could impact the sciences and the arts, as well as society in general? DASER is co-hosted by Cultural Programs of the National Academy of Sciences and our friends at Issues in Science and Technology. This is a journal that's co-published between the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine and Arizona State University. And you can find out more about what's happening at Issues in Science and Technology by visiting issues.org on the web. We are joined also by a network of over 50 similar salons around the world, a network organized by Leonardo, the International Society of Art, Science, and Technology. Today is the third and sadly the final installment of a series that we've enjoyed putting together entitled Conversations with Studio KOS. And we are pleased to welcome to the conversation today Janelle Wellons, who is an instrument operation systems engineer at Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena, California. And she'll be joined in conversation with our friends at Studio KOS, Robert Branch, Rick Savinon, Angel Abreu, and Jorge Abreu. So if you missed our previous DASERs, the evolution of Studio KOS, and a conversation with Dr. Samuel Roberts, you can watch them on our CPNAS YouTube channel. Over the past couple of months, we've covered the history of the Kids of Survival, which began in the 80s as an after-school art collaborative, empowering students in the Bronx. It operated under the direction of the late Tim Rollins. We have discussed the importance of education and the role that art and science can play in understanding and addressing issues of social inequities. And today we're going to hear the story of a young woman who became an engineer. And we'll hear about the obstacles that she had to overcome to achieve those goals. We are delighted to have Janelle Wellons with us. And I think you will agree, her story, as well as her high level of contagious energy, is inspiring. But before we get started, a few logistical issues. The first part of today's program is pre-recorded. But while you are watching it, our guests are present in the virtual green room, and you can begin taking your questions. So as questions come to mind, feel free to use the Q&A function located at the bottom of the screen. We will all come on after the video to continue the discussion. We are also going to use the chat function here in Zoom. When we were live, we had something called Community Share. That's where we asked anybody in the audience to take the mic, to introduce themselves, and to share their cross-disciplinary projects. So today we're going to use the chat function to do just that. So please introduce yourself in chat. Tell us where you're from and what you're up to. So Q&A button for questions and community share in the chat. So let's begin. Cultural Programs of the National Academy of Sciences and Issues in Science and Technology is proud to present a conversation with Studio KOS and Janelle Wellons.
Studio KOS, formerly Tim Rollins and KOS, is a after-school program that grew into an art collective in which we produce collaborative works based on works of literature.
KOS has always been about possibility. It's always been about transcendence. It's always been about not accepting things that are handed down to you. It's about making sure that your voice is heard.
Being a part of KOS, I learned everyone is an artist or can be if they are willing to do the hard work and pursue it with consistency.
KOS is individual voices that combine together become a harmonious chorus. My name is Rick Savinon.
My name is Jorge Abreu.
Robert Branch.
Angel Abreu, and I am from the Bronx, New York.
South Bronx, born and raised.
Bronx, New York.
It's a great breeding ground for artists.
It's honestly my duty, if I'm going to get this far, to give back and to make sure the path is easier and more accessible, especially for students that look like me, that see themselves in me, because that would have been great to have when I was on this journey. My name is Janelle, and I'm an instrument operations engineer at the NASA Jet Propulsion Laboratory, working on missions on our own planet Earth, the moon, Saturn, and beyond.
I'll get it started. So my name is Angel Abreu. I'm with Studio K.O.S, and we are doing the third installment of our DASER talk with the National Academy of Sciences. I'm honored to be here, and really honored to have the distinguished Janelle Wellons join us here, who is an instrument operations engineer at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, which is absolutely amazing. We are so excited to be talking to you. And I'd like to go on and kick it off and have my colleagues introduce themselves.
Hi, Janelle. Robert Branch here, coming to you from Bronx, New York. It's a pleasure to meet a real life rocket scientist that works at the legendary JPL Laboratories.
Hi, Janelle. My name is Rick Savinon. And I remember when I was a kid, they asked me, what were the three things you wanted to be? And I was a baseball player, a rocket scientist, and an artist. So it's a pleasure to meet you, and it's an honor that we're having this conversation.
Likewise.
Yeah, hi, Janelle. I'm Jorge Abreu, Studio KOS. It is an absolute honor. Thank you so much for joining us today, and I think we're going to have a great conversation. JPL is located in Pasadena, California, but you grew up in South Jersey, which is a ways from there, but not too far from the Bronx, New York, where KOS was started. Can you just tell us about your upbringing and the community that you were raised in?
Absolutely. So growing up where I did, I never really had this dream or desire to work for NASA one day. It just isn't what people from my town did. What kind of kickstarted my journey to how I did get here was totally by chance. I was in my junior year of high school. I had started to receive mail regularly this year in high school from colleges all over the country. And it was so overwhelming. I didn't know what to do with all of the information. My mom stopped me because she saw on the top of my pile was this pamphlet from a school called the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, or MIT. I had never heard of it. My mom, she did though. Thank goodness she did, because she said, stop, we are taking a look at this. Put it out on the kitchen table. We're taking a look. It's talking about this summer program. You're going to go and you're going to learn about STEM, the sciences, engineering, with over 70 other kids from all over the country, staying on the campus, getting the full experience, totally free of cost. Just got to apply and get in. And when spring came around and I got a phone call from her urging me to come home because there's a package in the mail and I need to open it. She's waiting in the doorway. She's got the package. She's ready. For the first time, I had this thing called hope, belief in myself. And I ripped that package open. First word says, congratulations. Even growing up in a place like New Jersey where there's no NASA scientists, engineers, there was a chance for someone like me to get into that space. And so that's kind of the story of how it all began in a way.
Congratulations to you. I so strongly identify that first because it reminds me a lot of my own experience in terms of my involvement in KOS and how KOS led me to a career in the arts and being the first person in my family to graduate college and being able to attend college tuition free as a result of this work. But I wanted to ask you, more deeply as to what is it about learning by doing that really helps kind of kick off and really open up teenagers and young people's mind to learning about science? The American philosopher John Dewey had this, really strong expression about learning by doing, and it's something that really motivates our project. And I think it's a very strong current in the sciences. Can you go back to being a teenager and being in that program and learning science by hands-on means?
Absolutely. I'm really glad you said that learning by doing. It's not something that I've necessarily thought hard about, but it most certainly applied to why my interest just skyrocketed, especially after I did this program. Because for the first time, instead of being in the classroom and learning the equations and the technical details and the theory, there was something to apply it to. And that's the game changer. And I find that, for a lot of students, you need to provide the context to provide the motivation. Why should you care? It's the question we should always be asking ourselves in anything that we do. Why should you care? And when you do it, that's when you get the why. It was life-changing to the point where before, when I didn't know anything about what I wanted to do, suddenly I had an idea of what I wanted to do with my life, with my career. And that was a course to apply to MIT. I didn't have a college of choice before, but now I know where I want to go. And I know at least that engineering is a pretty cool route to go to when it comes to a career. Because you do
science
things.
Life sounds like that art life. I really enjoyed hearing that story. I think Rick wants to come in and ask a few questions.
I totally understand when I get you when you say when you have a purpose and a goal, that's what gets you to your final product, right?
Right.
And a lot of the things that we do in KOS, like a blank canvas, I actually see the finished work, and that's what keeps me running. That's what keeps me going. When you're coming up with an idea at MIT and then to actually see it work, like that's one of your wow moments, right? Like
absolutely.
For KOS, and for me personally, I remember working on a Midsummer Night's Dream painting by Shakespeare. Because I know you're.
I love it.
And seeing it in the studio, and the painting is composed of many elements, which are flowers, and so we have to cut these elements out and paste them. But while doing so, there's so many other elements that are cut out on the floor, and the studio looks like a mess, right? But then when you take when I was able to take that painting and transfer it over to the gallery, that was my wow moment as well.
Wow.
Right?
I'm imagining it myself. I mean,
yeah, it's like one of your instruments that you developed. And so my question is, how do you build your vehicles and your systems?
It's a great question. So it kind of comes back to what exactly do I even do? Because instrument operations engineer, when I saw that was my job title, I had this moment of panic because I didn't know what it meant. This moment of, oh my gosh, what did I really get myself into? I'm really happy. I'm grateful to be here, but what is my actual job? And I found out that one, I was being put on one of the best teams ever at JPL, working on a mission called the Cassini mission to Saturn. Cassini was my first ever, I guess you could call it baby, because we always like to humanize our instruments, our missions, our projects and things of that sort, because they're important to us. You spend so much time and effort trying to make them successful. And so my role in Cassini is actually kind of unique in the sense that I came in at a time when it was the end. Cassini launched in 1997 when I was 3 years old. I didn't know anything about the mission, to be quite honest, before I joined it, but it was still out there in space almost 2 decades later when I joined the lab, which is amazing in its own right. And I love using Cassini as the example to explain my job just because it's so cool. So, as an instrument operations engineer and thinking of the Cassini mission, it was essentially my job to take images in space with Cassini's cameras. Just the coolest job you could possibly have. And the way that you go about doing that is by working with other teams. And so we have the scientists over here, and they're the drivers of the mission. They're asking all the questions of why, how, what is out there in our universe. They are the motivation. And so the engineers, they take that motivation and they build what can fulfill it. How can we get the answers to your questions? And so spacecraft are what you can think of as vehicles. They get you from point A to point B. They provide you with your power, your fuel, the things you need to stay alive for the journey. In this case, it was a 7-year journey from Earth to Saturn. That's how far these planets are from each other. And so the instruments, where the instruments come in, is they collect all of the fun science data. They answer the questions. So if you want to learn more about Saturn, before you go, what do you want to bring on the ride that'll help you figure out the answers to those questions? And cameras play a big role in that. They return images of Saturn's absolutely beautiful rings, its atmosphere, its many, many moons, just incredible. When you mention things like mission control and communicating with stuff out in space, that's me, and that's my role.
Amazing, Janelle. Your energy is palpable when you talk about the work and level of dedication. We are extremely dedicated to our work as well. And I do find that there's a big corollary between artists and scientists and how they imagine things. One of the things that struck me in reading about your work is that you and part of your work is to anticipate future uses of these instruments. We kind of do the same with how our work will be taken by the audience, right? But how and used in future generations. Is there a corollary between the theory and practice in how you conceptualize those future uses?
Absolutely. There's definitely correlation. So you come up with these questions, you want to learn more. And so you build these spacecraft, you put these instruments on it, you send it out there. It has years of collecting, making observations, new discoveries. And guess what you're left with at the end of the day? More questions. You get out there, you find things that you thought you'd find, and you find things that you didn't think you would find. And then you have these questions flowing, and we start thinking, okay, well, we went to Saturn and we did find these things, but now we have to go back. We need new instruments. We need new technology. The world has changed since then when it was launched 20 years ago. What can we do differently now? And what have we learned from the past that can be applied to the future as well? You know, all of those things are going on during missions. It feels like there's never going to be an end to the questions that are asked, because honestly, when you're discovering and you're searching and you're exploring something as vast as the universe, your work can never just be complete at the end of the day. There's no checklists. You're never done. And so I think I really love that about this field, because with knowledge, there really isn't going to be an end. That's the great thing about it. You're never going to be the smartest in the room. You're never going to know it all, because you can't. And that's kind of the whole point. Learn what you can and keep on pushing. And the mantra of JPL is dare mighty things. And I absolutely love it, because it really rings true to the culture and the purpose behind what we do too.
You know, one of the other things that I found that there's no end to are setbacks. And I was, really taken in your story when you talk about how, JPL, MIT was a huge leap, but JPL was something that you kind of had to work for. And I also know that some of these instruments that NASA builds and JPL has put out into space, it takes a lot of trial and error to kind of get them up there working. And we find that that's a big part of our process. Can you talk a little bit about that, about how trial and error impacts you and drives you, and how you use failure as a fuel at JPL? No pun intended.
Absolutely. I think even talking about how it's played a role in my own life is probably more powerful, to be honest, because, you know, going back to the journey and how it was never necessarily a straight line to where I am now, it it really truly was a series of stumbling blocks and not getting it right. And looking back, all of those things made me a better person. And so I get to MIT, right? I did the program, I got accepted. Amazing. I'm at MIT, I'm an actual student this time around. And my first thought was, okay, now what? What next? I don't have my plan. I know that I love math. I always have. So I started thinking, I don't know, maybe I'll be a theoretical mathematician. I had really fallen in love with the beauty of math and honestly its intersection with art. As a high school student, I just was fascinated about how all the things that we see in nature, from the petals on flowers, why is there a certain number of petals on flowers? You know, those answers kind of related back to math, and it was just so much beauty in it. So that's what I thought I would be. And after I spoke to a couple of upperclassmen, they quickly told me, are you ready for the long haul? Because if you want to be a theoretical mathematician, you better be ready to get your PhD, do years of work, and may still be wrong about your theories. So, oh, okay. Maybe I'll try something else. Just give it a try. And I know I like engineering. I did that summer program. I knew it was something I was interested in. So I take a look at the list. You got chemical, got mechanical, we got computer, electrical, civil. I mean, seriously, MIT is an engineering school. The choices were endless. And then I came across one called aerospace engineering. I said, aerospace? Oh, that's right. One of my teachers, he said that he did aerospace engineering. And honestly, the word space, if you've got the word space, you have an unfair advantage, because who doesn't think that space is just cool? So I find myself in that intro class, and I'm sitting there taking the class, all my classmates, and the professor on the first day, he's going over the syllabus, and we're going to learn about how rockets launch, and we're going to learn about how planes fly, and we're also going to learn about the history of space flight. And he shows this amazing image of an astronaut fixing the Hubble telescope in space. And I remember just feeling so like impressed and amazed, like this is what we get to learn about. And then the professor says the astronaut in the photo was him. And oh, my whole life just, what? Are you telling me I am currently in the same room as a real life astronaut? The answer was yes. And at that point, I couldn't walk away from an opportunity like that. And that's how I learned about JPL. I kept hearing, you know, we're going to pretend we're going to send something to Mars, just like JPL. We're going to pretend to go to the sun, just like JPL. JPL, JPL, JPL. It was everywhere. I couldn't not know about it, being that major. And so, of course, I was going to apply to get the internship and hopefully maybe work there one day. And I would sit in line at the career fair, waiting my turn, resume, all dressed up professional. And I overheard my classmates talking about all the amazing things they did and started to think about myself and all the amazing things I wasn't doing. And it wasn't too much of a surprise when I didn't get the internship. It's like, okay, you know, I could do better next time. So I did, you know, I took classes I was more interested in just to take them. And I did a lot of work in my community and in outreach, trying to give back because that was important to me too. I just tried to develop myself as a person, not just a student who attended MIT. What else did I have? Why would JPL believe in me if I don't even believe in me? And so I came with a new kind of confidence. And I think that they saw it because for the first time, not only did I hear back, but I got an interview with 3 supervisors. 3! Oh my gosh, it was overwhelming. It made me reflect on one of the biggest lessons that I got from that summer program too, which was it's all about the delta. It's all about the change. Delta is a math term, and that's why we chose it to be a part of our slogan. And deltas are all about the before and the after. Once I started to reflect on the Janelle of the before and the Janelle who was me, the after, my whole way that I viewed myself changed. So that comparing myself to the math Olympiads, the student who built a nuclear reactor in their garage to get to MIT, I started thinking about freshman Janelle who didn't even know what I was doing, didn't really know what an aerospace engineer was, who was now in capstone classes planning on making cube satellites to send to the moon. I was a totally different person and definitely felt like an engineer. And I guess that's what shined through at the end of the day and what continues to drive me to this day.
Through the things that bring you joy, through the practice of making art, if you do it in a disciplined way, if you are very precise with the way you pursue inquiry, that you can have insight into science, and it can be a discipline, and it can help you kind of transform the way you see and interact in the world. For me, very concretely, being able to go to college on a full tuition scholarship that wouldn't have been possible. And this all came to this kind of art and using art as a scaffold to make that happen. And that's why I think was really moved us about your story, is just sort of like the creativity in the way you approach engineering and problem solving has led you to all these interesting places, literally to touch the sky with some of these instruments you manage and control, which is to me very impressive, because I can't even drive a car on Earth. I don't have a license, and here you are making plans to operate machinery on another planet. My mind blown.
Also, to chime in, is the intersections that I've noticed is experimentation between science and art, right? A lot of artists will say, well, I made this work of art and I don't think it's successful. I think it's a failure. And it's part of the journey, like you said earlier. There's a journey for the artist and the scientist, right? In order to experiment, those failures are part of your success.
Yes, they are.
Right. I just love this notion of you being a photographer of Saturn based on Earth. That's just, you're an artist. That's really, really cool. I heard you talk about this with your students on the program Sci Girls. I thought it was great. I was watching it with my younger son, and I wanted to ask you a little bit about how you do such a great job explaining science to young people in a way that you really find the highest common denominator. Tell me a little bit about how you approach that, because that's something that we take a lot of pride in our practice, is that we don't want to condescend when we're working with young people in ours. We want to make sure that they come away speaking to you and they felt recognized and seen. And I just want you to comment a little bit about that, because I sort of feel like not only have you made this tremendous journey to become a rocket scientist before Hidden Figures, I mean, before that was kind of publicized as something that you can do before those terrific scientists and women. But tell me a little bit about why you teach, how you teach, and why you teach with certain communities.
So one, I feel like to have gotten this far, to get to NASA, I couldn't just get here and do my job and call it a day. I think that it's honestly my duty, if I'm going to get this far, to give back and to make sure the path is easier and more accessible, especially for students that look like me, that see themselves in me, because that would have been great to have when I was on this journey. So that's the motivation for the why I want to give back. And then how I approach it, I honestly I'm always trying my best just to put myself in their shoes. When I was a kid going to assemblies, the ones I remember is not like I remember whatever facts they were necessarily talking about or trying to get across. I remember the feeling of meeting them, and that's what stuck with me. I left that as something like, that was so cool. That's what you go back and report to mom and dad. It's about how you made the kids feel in that moment that sticks around. And so instead of trying to get kids interested by listing out all of the scientific and technical discoveries and facts, I first and foremost make an effort to humanize myself so that they can see themselves in me before trying to see themselves as a NASA engineer, because that's not what I am first. I am a person first, and NASA is a place that I work, but it's not everything. And I'm also not this unreachable genius, nothing like you. I instead am a person who makes mistakes, who doesn't always get it right, like you. And so that's been my main approach. And then, you can see your effect on kids just by looking at their faces. I always say that the younger the crowd, the more scared I am, the more nervous I get, because you're coming up across some critics. If they're not interested in what you're saying, they will make it clear. I'm getting on my phone. I'm gonna talk to my friend. If you want to stick with them, you need to talk in a way they're going to care about, not in a way that you care about. Those aren't necessarily the same things. And kids are smart and they ask a lot of great questions. They'll ask questions that'll stump me. A kindergartner can definitely stump a NASA engineer because they are in this open, they're in a place where they're not constrained. Like you were saying earlier, it's just, the sky is the limit. Why not ask these questions? And so you got to put that same cap on. And it's not always a cap that engineers are consciously wearing, but should be wearing. Think outside the box. These kids are thinking outside the box. So bring them something that they can do something with,
I know that you're a Shakespeare fan, so I'm going to leave you with this. Shakespeare has one of the best definitions of art, and you are an artist. I know that for a fact. And it's in the Midsummer Night's Dream, and I quote, "As imagination bodies forth the forms of things unknown, the poet's pen, the engineer's mind turns them into shapes and gives to every nothing a local habitation and a name." So you definitely are an artist, and we're so happy to have had this conversation with you. So thank you.
Thank you so much. I am printing that line and pasting it right on my wall.
Well, thank you, everyone. This is JD Tolosik, and I'm going to ask our guests, Janelle and Studio KOS, to turn on their videos and their sound, and we're going to get this discussion going. And while everybody's turning on their videos, just want to encourage you that if you have questions, some of you have already started placing them in the Q&A function. And I'm going to try to moderate in as many of these questions as I can. But first of all, let me just say thank you, community, for all your input in the chat and this conversation we already have going here. And Robert, Angel, Jorge, Rick, thank you for this third in the series of conversations with Studio KOS. And as I said at the beginning, man, Janelle Wellons' personality is contagious. Her enthusiasm there, and I think if anybody disagrees, I want you to tell me about it, because I don't think it exists. Okay, so let's just jump into some of these questions and keep them coming. I'll feed in as many as we can. But we did have one pre-event question that I want to throw out, and that is, what advice would you give to either teens who want to go into art and science, or for educators who are trying to use art and science as a way of teaching? And that seems like that's a really wonderful question to start this with, because you're all educators on one level or the other, and sort of this ideal of why a student would want to go into art and science, because it's not an established discipline. It's actually that sort of thing that we've been trying to talk about. And now, the question actually says, what is somebody who wants to go into art and science? So there's a lot of ways to unpack that question. I'll just let whoever would like to.
Let me jump on that. I
Robert.
just, as a teacher and also as an art student, I just let your curiosity lead you. Don't ask questions and be willing to explore. Often in traditional models of education, we have these, we project these brilliant masters of fields, and we say, hey, this is, and sometimes what young people think is you should follow, try to leap ahead of these folks. And what if you really listen to carefully is that all of these people who have made establishments and made inquiry and have expanded the field of art and science have done so because they followed the things that they were curious about. They asked questions. And I just think that if you're constantly asking questions, you're going to have you're going to really enjoy studying art or studying science. And I think as teachers, we want to create spaces in which students can ask questions and explore. And I think that's one of the tough parts of being a teacher in our current public school environment, that there isn't a lot of opportunity for inquiry. We have these very tight spaces of time. We're on Zoom, we have to get to the next class. And we have to, as teachers, create spaces where students can ask questions, explore, and make mistakes and follow inquiry.
I'd actually like to add to that, and thank you, Robert, for saying that. But I'd also like to add, this is a mantra that we have with KOS and how we work so well together. Maybe sometimes we butt heads a little bit, but checking your ego at the door. We all, and no matter what it is that you do in life, you've got to work collaboratively. And so checking your ego at the door. I mean, one of the themes that we've worked with is Jules Verne's From the Earth to the Moon, where there is a tragic miscalculation that is the undoing of this character in the book. And we study this and we look at this, and these are the things that we like to delve into. These are those intersections that this is why, honestly, I think this is why we're here with Janelle today, and so grateful for it. But Janelle, I'm sure that you would probably agree with this. I mean, you're working with a team of people. You got to make sure, I think we talked about this in our talk. It didn't come up in the cut here, but the fact that that you can't necessarily or think that you're the smartest person in the room, right? It's about it's a team effort, and so anyway. So that's what I'll say. I'll leave it at that.
Janelle, do you want to add anything to their question?
Sure. I think my piece of advice is that you can't be afraid to be daring. And so I feel like there are crossroads that are presented to people at different points in their life. And it's oftentimes these opportunities that can be absolutely wonderful. Like when I got that pamphlet in the mail and my mom told me to apply. But so often we block our own blessings. We see that opportunity and say, well, it's not going to work out for me. And if you're looking at the costs and benefits of doing it, it's like the world would tell you, why not go for it? Like, what is the worst that could possibly happen? And, I grew up reading fiction. I love fantasy, sci-fi. I love going to these worlds that other people have created and immersing myself into them. And when I think of it, I think about the Harry Potter series, how Harry Potter could have been a totally different story if when Hagrid busted through his door and was like, Harry, you're a wizard and you're coming with me. And Harry just looked at him like, no, that's okay. I'm going to stay here in my crappy life with these people who don't even love me because I'm too afraid for this magical place you're telling me I belong to. Like, his whole story would have been different if he didn't take that opportunity. And it's the same thing for us as people. There's going to be a chance for you to pick up the sword in your own story, but you just can't be too afraid to take that step. That's where the real fun happens. That's when your life really begins.
Also, I'd like to add, anyone who is an educator is like, the chance for exploration is essential. It's as a scientist and an artist, the exciting part is like we work with materials that we don't know what's going to happen, right? That's the exciting part. And when something magical happens, that's what science and art kind of do, right? It just throws you into a realm where you just discovered something new, and it propels you to do more. So, one of our works, Origin of Species, Darwin's Origin of Species, he noted that the mutations within that he discovered within certain areas in the Galapagos Islands were the ones that survived, the ones who actually mutated, right, changed with their environment. So what I'm saying is, as an educator, you got to change with the times as well. You know, look at new materials, listen to your students. You know, sometimes your students will have great ideas, and they'll propel you to do and to you know, take. It's a leap of faith at times. So don't be afraid.
Here, let me jump on that, Janelle, real quick. Yeah, I mean, Harry didn't really have much choice. He was really in a bad situation. I mean, if he didn't go on, you know, that was just not going to be a good look for him. But yeah, so, you know, bringing it back to the, you know, to the Earth to the Moon, from the Earth to the Moon, it's you know, the putting together of art and science. Many people, you know, you won't really, you know, to bridge the two subjects is, I guess, a bit difficult. Even bridging any two subjects can be complex for folks. But, you know, when you're taking constellations and you're putting constellations on canvas with broken glass that you find on the streets, and how this can propel you, it's a great marriage, and yeah, I think it's beautiful.
It's not only a great marriage, it's a necessary one. Like, why do people care about NASA and what we do? If there was no way to be able to communicate to people off the street what was actually going on out there in space, there'd be no love there. There are a lot of different ways to explain what's going on in space, and there are really good ways to explain it if you really want to touch people and make them feel like they are a part of what we do and the mission of what we do. And art is visual. Art is something that anyone can experience, whether it be textile or looking at it or interpreting it in your own way. So I feel like if you want people to be interested in this kind of space, you need to have a plan for how you're going to communicate it. And that's where art plays such a huge role in that. And I feel like if you're going to go into science, you should not feel like you're leaving behind the artist side of your brain. It is equally as important to be able to communicate what you are doing in ways that are effective and can honestly make or break, you know, whether something gets moved forward or stays back.
You know, I think as a nation, it's hugely, to build on what you're saying, Janelle, so I think it's hugely important to invest in STEM. But if we want to get more people involved in STEM, I think it's no coincidence that adding the letter A and making it STEAM and adding art to that process is really important. You know, the psychologist Piaget used to use this. I used to map out learning as setting out scaffolds, and I think art is a wonderful scaffold for exploration, building things and making it. And you know, there's a wonderful history of, you know, artists who had engineering leanings, going back to people like Da Vinci, all the way back to, you know, people like current people like Duchamp and lots of other wonderful contemporary artists who mix Eva Hess, who mix materials and mix science in the creation of their work. And I think that it's just a perfect marriage. And what we need to do is find and create spaces where they can happen. And that means that we have to break down some of the barriers that we've built in the way we've constructed our educational system over the last 20 years, and kind of go back to that one room schoolhouse, or, you know, the lab space. I think we just need to create these maker spaces in which you can do multidisciplinary work.
So this conversation is kind of a perfect segue into a question that is directed to Janelle. Janelle, Michelle writes, Janelle, you are inspiring. And I have to say, personally, I agree. You have used the word humanize a number of times. How do you communicate your leadership communicate with your leadership about the importance of art and creativity in developing the best scientific minds?
Wow, that is, wow.
Yeah.
So, I feel like when I got to JPL, I immediately realized that I would not feel fulfilled if I just did the job that I was hired for, which is the engineering work. I knew that I was going to have to do more in order to feel like I really gave it my all to make sure that the path for others would be easier. And so when I got to JPL and I'm poking around and I'm meeting people who care about these other things as well, it became clear to me that maybe there is a chance for me to do something here. And the way that I did that was I revived one of the employee resource groups that was for the Black community at JPL, because I arrived there, I looked around, wasn't sure if I saw too many people like me. And then I did meet some, like Patachi, who's on this call, and realized, hey, we got the community. Let's just make a way to easily bring us all together. And so with doing that work, I started to realize that, having communities are actually very important to keeping employees happy. It can be the difference between you wanting to stay forever and leaving because you feel like you don't belong. And so when it comes to talking to leadership about the importance of being humans first, it actually is quite an easy sell when you talk about it as a way to retain talent. I mean, if you want your talent that you've hired to stay, you have to make it an environment that they want to stay in, an environment that they want to be a part of. And I think it's this symbiotic harmony at this point where the work that we're doing to encourage these young people that they can be in science and that what we do is very cool, and that, hey, I know that you like music and you like art, and you don't have to stop liking any of those things to also become an engineer one day, and giving them those spaces to encourage them. And then when they get to a place like JPL, it's like, and you will still have support. We're still here. That full circle is so important. And I definitely believe that leadership sees that very clearly now, and the value that being humans and being people who talk about more than just the equations and how to make these spacecraft work is just as important as like the projects that we do. It's the people who make them that make JPL special.
Can I jump in really quick? I mean, Janelle, love you. Absolutely. I mean, absolutely, 100%. And you're an absolute inspiration. But I do, for some of the viewers out there, because I know that you've faced adversity as well. I would love for you to, because here we are when we try to, as artists, as scientists, push a certain agenda for people to think more macro, which is certainly what you're doing. But you're an absolute trailblazer, and I know it wasn't an easy road for you. And so I would love to know, just on a more human level, I mean, some of the adversity that you may have faced, at MIT, at JPL, like some things that, because I hope that there's some young folk watching this and are being inspired by this, and this is our only hope. This is why we do this work, is just to try to keep pass the baton back. And so I would love to know, and maybe I hope I'm not getting too personal, but just would love to know some of the adversity that you may have faced.
Sure, Angel. It's not too personal at all. It's very relevant. I would say that when I look back at my time in school, and particularly in like middle school, high school, I don't look back at it like I wish I could do that again. I absolutely had like fantastic friends who I'm still friends with to today, but it was not easy. And I feel like it's so hard to imagine what it's like to be a kid in school, because on the one hand, you don't have the responsibilities of bills and things like that. But on the other hand, your entire existence is based off of this social hierarchy of kids, and it can be devastating. When I was in middle school, I had this moment I'll never forget it, where we were in a science class and we got these microscopes and we were told to take out a piece of our hair and put it under the microscope. And so I took out a piece and I looked at it, and my hair was the color brown. And for me, I was like celebrating this, like, oh my gosh, I have brown hair. And everyone's looking at me like, what is your deal? Because I had always been told you're black hair, black eyes, dark skin. To have anything that differed from that made me feel like, oh my gosh, I'm not like that. And looking back, oh my gosh, like what had to have been ingrained in me to be celebrating the fact that I wasn't black? It was just, I look back at that moment like I feel sorry for myself. I got my hair straightened and I was feeling so excited about that. I looked like my classmates. I grew up in a predominantly white school. I come in feeling so confident, right? And this one guy is like, you look like Oprah. And I'm like, it crushed me. It totally crushed me. And going through high school, the jokes were around the same topics, but they got a little bit worse, a little more mean. Like, oh, you only got accepted into this program because, or Janelle, I'm blacker than you, or you're black, but you're an Oreo, black on the outside, but white on the inside. I was one of the only black students who was in these AP classes with the rest of them. And these jokes, even though they were jokes, they harped on me. But at that point in my life, I was just a doormat. And being a doormat for too long, it does devastating things to you, to your self-esteem. It does devastating things about the way you look at yourself. And it led to depression. I was depressed my senior year. I found out I got into MIT. It was great and all, but I was depressed, clinically depressed. My parents had to deal with that. My family had to deal with that. And no one at school could understand what was wrong with me because I was always the bubbly, happy one. It just was so out of character for me to not be that way. And in a lot of ways, I feel like, one, my parents saved me because they took me to someone who was trained to deal with diseases like this. And two, MIT saved me because I went there and I was put in a community of Black students who all happened to be smart, but that didn't matter because you're at a school like MIT. Who cares? Everyone's smart in some way. And that experience totally changed the way that I viewed myself and how much I believed in myself. And I'm very thankful for it. MIT was not just about the education and learning to become an engineer. MIT was a lot about learning to be comfortable with being myself, who I am, and be proud of it, because I definitely came into it not thinking that way.
Thank you so much, Janelle. I appreciate your response to that. It's very inspiring and informative. So I've got a slightly different question that's directed towards, I think, Studio KOS, and it may be worth discussing the question itself and answering it. It says, while practicing your art, have you come upon a new use of science? And if so, please share the story. Now, I'm sorry, Robert, if you want to go ahead, but I wanted to kind of, mention maybe we need to talk about what that question is asking as well. And I guess Robert, go ahead.
Well, it's interesting. When we came upon the pandemic and we were trying to figure out how do we, kind of continue our work, we were looking at, well, what are the, how can we continue to provide a collaborative education space and make sure that we are kind of doing what, creating art that is meaningful, resonant, and builds community. And so we had to take, put on our kind of social science hat and really start evaluating and taking a look at technology and what are the affordances and constraints of the technologies for us to use in order to kind of facilitate that space and create that work. And so I think, we have to be broad when we look at the spectrum of science and the products that we aim to produce. But I sort of feel, as artists, we're always kind of, working on these hypotheses and then trying to figure out and then testing them, because we don't set out to make we set out to make something, but we don't know exactly what that's going to look like. There's a little bit of intuition there. There's a little bit of guessing. And we're constantly taking different kinds of frameworks and taking them apart. I think, there's one of the things that we try to do whenever we're working with the tool is we literally try to break it down to its core components. As conceptual artists, that's a very important part of our practice. To what is the essence of this material? What's paint about? Well, we said paint, we distill it down to a drip, viscosity, and then we try to take and create imagery with those those kind of key and core components. And I mean, that's what we often see science do to great effect. It's just sort of like, how can we make something so simple that you can kind of connect to many larger, larger, more powerful ideas? And that's something that we try to do through the visual allegories that we explore in our paintings.
Well, I'd add that this is a little bit more rudimentary, but the fact that we work with book pages, we talk about the symbiotic relationship with nature and with weather and what's going on. That dictates how we operate in the studio when we are in person. We can't put these book pages on when it's humid, when it's too humid. And that's the thing. Like, we're like, so we figured out, oh my God, why are we battling this? Every time it rains, we come up with terrible paintings because these book pages don't lay down right. Oh, maybe it's the humidity in the outside, and so but that's also a great metaphor for trying to again, that symbiotic relationship with trying to just go with the flow, really go with the flow, go with what is going to work. Today is not going to work. And you can tell any students, any art students out there, or scientists or whoever, yeah, you know what, today's not quite right. And I think maybe as artists, we get that stigma that it's like, okay, these guys are they just go, fly by the seat of their pants sometimes. But no, it's one of those things where you do okay, where's the wind blowing today? Let's go with that. And I think that is a great metaphor for being one with how that wind is blowing and reading that and just going with that flow. And I think Janelle would probably agree that you've got to go with that. There's certain situations that you can't control, right? And so you just have to adjust, and you have to make sure that that it feels right. You're still pushing through, right? You're not going to let that dictate it, but just go with it.
We have a lot of fun. Ricky should probably tell a story about some of the things that happened when we built those Pinocchios out of wood, and some of the scientific things that we discovered. Because really, a lot of it has to do with kind of material discoveries and what things won't adhere, what things won't work. We work with materials, organic materials such as blood. How do we keep that preserved? But I think the Pinocchio story is really fun, and also in terms of the actual making of the work, we had to collaborate with scientists.
Yeah, we have a work based on Carlo Collodi's Pinocchio, and so what we did was we went to a guy in Maine who sells lumber, and he said that he senses that the lumber has its own soul. So the minute he said that, we were like in tune. And so we picked out 50 of these logs and we took them to the studio, and we actually went to a doctor who actually painted eyes for children who he made eyes, but he would hand paint them for children who lost an eye. So he matched our eyes, and then we embedded the eyes into the wood, and they look incredible. At times, you look at them and they're just, it looks like just a piece of wood. But then as you get closer, a lot of my friends, I have one at home. A lot of my friends will say, "Well, that's pretty creepy," But so the story is, we have these 50 logs in the studio. We sell one to a collector. And she frantically calls the gallery, screaming that there's tons of bugs coming out of the logs. So during a season, like cicadas are going to do pretty soon. There's these little bugs that they burrow into the wood, they lay their eggs, and then they leave. And so during like a couple of months later, they come out. So this collector had all these pieces of all these bugs coming out of the wood. So we had to take all the pieces of wood and actually fumigate them to kill all the bugs that were in them. So like I said, it's you don't know what you're going to come across, but those unexpected things actually make your future projects better, and you're able to predict what could happen in the future. So, and there was another story where we were doing these works based on with blood called Temptation of St. Anthony, and we would let them dry, and in the morning there'd be all these little holes on them, and we didn't see that before the night before. What happened was flies would come in and actually eat away at the blood and leave these little holes, and it actually made the work more interesting. So we started leaving the works out for the flies to eat and to actually become artists themselves.
I need to see this. Like, I need to see this. And then also Robert just casually mentioned, oh, we have organics like blood. And like, I could never get bored talking to you all. I need to know everything that you're doing. That's so fascinating. And I would have freaked. That wood sculpture, that would have just owned my house. I wouldn't have lived there.
Maybe we need to have another conversation, Janelle. I mean, I think
we do.
Right?
I definitely think we do.
and also that was a credit to Tim, because Tim would he would try to create the space where we could do these experiments safely, and then we would do research, and that was part of what really hooked a lot of us in and helped us improve our own. We were art kids, we're struggling in school, but through this work in the studio, we were able to learn science, because now we realized, this is what flooded. This is what flooded. Then we studied the Black Plague, and we studied how there are microorganisms inside thing. We're using animal blood, by the way, for this. So we would go to the butcher shop and grab them. There's one at the Carnegie Mellon collection that you can see that's quite amazing.
Wow.
Everyone, we're getting close to the time that we need to end this conversation, but I do love the way that you answered that question, in the sense that a lot of times we think about these sort of interactions between art and science as, like the Leonardo da Vinci type of grand solution to something. And a lot of times in our daily lives, what you just said, think about the humidity, thinking about the materials, thinking about how to use that material from an artist standpoint to be more creative. But just, what do we know about what we know? Bugs live in woods. We're going to have a problem with that. And, what are the solutions to that? The way that these disciplines inform one another. You just gave several wonderful examples. And so I want to thank you for this. I just wonder if anybody has any sort of closing remarks or comments that you want to end on before we sign off. Everyone seems to be quite happy, except Angel. I know you've got something to say. You always have something wonderful to add.
All I want to say is that this has been a wonderful experience. And I'm throwing it out there, JD. I don't know. Maybe we can keep this going somehow, but it may not be appropriate for this moment. But
I think we're going to. KOS has been in our lives at the National Academy of Sciences for over a decade, and I don't imagine this ending. And Janelle, we're going to stay in touch. Janelle's already connecting up with some of our other people and. At the National Academy of Engineering. And so I think stay tuned, everyone. We'll see what happens. Okay. Thank you, everyone, and have a great day.
Thank
you, baby. Thank you. Thanks, Janelle.